The message arrived during what should have been a peaceful morning on Cytheria Prime. Ambassador Zekthai stood in his crystalline office, overlooking the sprawling capital city as millions of beings went about their daily lives below. His blue-scaled hands trembled as he read the intelligence report for the third time. The Vorthan Empire had crushed another star system overnight. 12 worlds now lay in ruins under their brutal occupation. Zekthai moved to his communication console with heavy steps. His 3 hearts beat in an irregular rhythm as panic set in. The Vorathans were only 2 jumps away from Cytherian space now. Their massive fleet of over 300 warships moved like a plague across the galaxy, consuming everything in their path. The reptilian Vorathans showed no mercy to the species they conquered. They stripped planets bare of resources and enslaved any survivors. On the other side of the city, civilian leader Velnara watched the refugee ships arriving in endless streams. Families from the outer colonies packed into cargo vessels and passenger liners, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs. The stories they told were all the same. The Vorathans gave no warning. They simply arrived and began destroying everything that moved. The Cytherian defense fleet consisted of 40 ships. They were built for exploration and light patrol duties, not warfare. Against the Vorthan war machine, they would last perhaps an hour in open battle. Velnara had run the tactical simulations herself. Every scenario ended the same way: total defeat. Back in his office, Ambassador Zekthai pulled up the diplomatic database. The Cytherian Confederation had few allies. Most species in this sector of the galaxy were either too weak to help or too far away to arrive in time. His clawed fingers moved across the holographic display, searching through contact records. Then he found it. The entry was small and recent. 2 years ago, the Cytherians had made first contact with a species called humans. The meeting had been brief but positive. The humans had seemed friendly enough. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards, but they had shown genuine interest in peaceful cooperation. When several human colony worlds had faced crop failures, the Cytherians had freely shared their advanced agricultural techniques. The humans had been very grateful. Zekthai accessed the quantum communication array. Sending a message across such vast distances would drain significant power, but they had no choice. He began composing the transmission, choosing his words carefully. The humans were a young species, barely 2 centuries into spaceflight. They would have limited resources, but perhaps they could spare some medical supplies or food for the refugees. The message was simple and direct. He explained the situation facing the Cytherian Confederation. The Vorthan Empire was approaching their space with overwhelming force. The Cytherians faced complete annihilation within weeks. Any aid the humans could provide would be deeply appreciated. Medical supplies, food, even moral support would mean everything to his dying people. He transmitted the message and slumped back in his chair. Now came the hardest part: waiting. Meanwhile, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Horizon as it conducted routine surveys in the Outer Rim territories. His crew of 63 humans had been mapping stellar phenomena for the past 8 months. It was peaceful work, far from the politics and tensions of the inner worlds. Morrison preferred it that way. The communications officer called out from her station. "Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission. It's coming through the quantum relay network." Morrison moved to the communication console. Priority transmissions were rare this far from human space. He authorized the download and waited as the alien text appeared on his screen. The translation software worked quickly to convert the Cytherian language into standard English. As Morrison read the message, his expression grew grim. The Cytherians had helped humanity when they needed it most. Their agricultural technology had saved millions of human lives across 3 colony worlds. Now they were facing extinction and asking for whatever small aid humanity could provide. Morrison immediately forwarded the message through official channels. Within hours, it had reached the offices of Admiral Kate Sullivan at Fleet Command on Luna Station. The Admiral was reviewing tactical reports when her aide brought her the urgent communication. Sullivan had served in the fleet for 28 years. She had seen her share of conflicts and understood the brutal realities of galactic politics. As she read the Cytherian plea for aid, she also pulled up intelligence files on the Vorthan Empire. What she found there made her blood run cold. The Vorathans were not just conquerors. They were exterminators. Every world they captured was stripped of all valuable resources. The local populations were either killed outright or enslaved for labor. There was no negotiation with the Vorthon Empire. They responded to only one thing: superior force. Admiral Sullivan called her senior staff into the main briefing room. Around the holographic table sat the finest military minds in human space. General Rick Hayes commanded the Marine Corps. Admiral Paul Grant oversaw fleet logistics. Captain Lisa Turner led the first battle group. Each of them had decades of experience in their fields. Sullivan activated the main display and showed them the Catherian message. Then she overlaid intelligence data about Vorthon expansion patterns and military capabilities. The room fell silent as the officers absorbed the information. General Hayes spoke first. The Catherians are asking for medical supplies and food aid. Standard humanitarian response would be to dispatch a hospital ship with a destroyer escort. Admiral Grant nodded. We could have relief supplies en route within 72 hours. Basic medical equipment, emergency rations, perhaps some construction materials to help with the refugees. Captain Turner studied the tactical display more carefully. She had fought against pirates and raiders in the outer colonies. The patterns looked familiar, but the scale was terrifying. Admiral, if we send a hospital ship into this situation, we'll just be giving the Vorthons more targets. They don't take prisoners. They don't honor medical neutrality. Sullivan leaned forward. The Catherians saved 3 of our colony worlds when their crops were failing. New Montana, New Texas, and Kepler Colony would have starved without their agricultural technology. Conservative estimates put the human lives saved at over 2 million people. The room grew quiet as the officers considered this. Humanity had a strong tradition of honoring debts. When someone helped your people survive, you didn't forget. You certainly didn't abandon them when they called for help. Admiral Grant broke the silence. What are you thinking, Kate? Sullivan looked around the table at her senior staff. These were people who had dedicated their lives to protecting human interests. But they also understood that sometimes protecting those interests meant protecting the friends who had helped you along the way. I'm thinking the Catherians asked for aid, Sullivan said slowly. They didn't specify what kind of aid. They just said to send whatever we could spare. She paused, studying the tactical display showing Vorthon fleet movements. I think they're going to need a bit more than medical supplies. The implications hung in the air. Admiral Sullivan was suggesting something that had never been attempted in human history. A full military intervention in an alien conflict, against an enemy that outgunned them and fought with ruthless efficiency. But the debt was real. The Catherians had freely shared technology that saved millions of human lives. They had asked for nothing in return except friendship. Now they faced extinction and had turned to humanity as their last hope. Sullivan stood and walked to the main display. She traced the Vorthon expansion pattern with one finger. They've conquered 12 star systems in the past 6 months. They're not going to stop with the Catherians. Eventually, this threat will reach human space. We can deal with them now when they're focused on someone else, or we can wait for them to come knocking on our door. The strategic logic was sound. The Vorthon Empire represented a long-term threat to human security. Better to engage them while they were extended and fighting on multiple fronts than to wait for them to consolidate their conquests and turn their attention to human territory. Captain Turner studied the fleet readiness reports. If we're serious about this, we'll need more than one battle group. The Vorthons have over 300 ships. Our intelligence suggests they're well-armed and experienced. Admiral Sullivan nodded. I'm going to request authorization for Operation Lighthouse. Full mobilization of the 1st, 3rd, and 5th fleets. General Hayes raised an eyebrow. That's 600 ships and 40,000 personnel. The largest military operation in human history. The Catherians asked for aid, Sullivan replied. We're going to give them exactly what they need. The emergency session of the United Earth Federation High Command convened 6 hours after Admiral Sullivan's request reached Earth. President Lisa Chen appeared via hologram from the White House, her image flickering slightly due to the quantum transmission delay. Around the conference table sat the most powerful military and political leaders in human space. Admiral Sullivan stood before the massive tactical display that dominated the briefing room. The 3-dimensional map showed the current positions of Vorthon forces, their expansion patterns over the past year, and the projected timeline for their assault on Catherian space. Red markers indicated conquered worlds, while blue showed the shrinking territories of free species. Ladies and gentlemen, Sullivan began, 2 years ago the Catherians shared advanced agricultural technology with our colony worlds. That technology saved over 2 million human lives during the crop failures on New Montana, New Texas, and Kepler Colony. They asked for nothing in return except our friendship. General Rick Hayes leaned forward in his chair. Kate, we all remember what the Catherians did for us. The question is what we can realistically do for them. They're asking for medical supplies and humanitarian aid. Sullivan touched a control on the display. The map zoomed in to show the Vorton fleet composition. 320 warships, including 12 massive dreadnoughts and 4 planet-killer vessels. Rick, if we send a hospital ship with a destroyer escort, we'll be sending those crews to their deaths. The Vorthons don't take prisoners. They don't recognize medical neutrality. They exterminate everything that gets in their way. President Chen studied the tactical information with growing concern. What are our intelligence estimates on Vorthon capabilities? Admiral Paul Grant activated his datapad. Their ships are built for brute force attacks. Heavy armor, massive plasma cannons, and numerical superiority. They rely on overwhelming firepower rather than tactical sophistication. However, their sheer numbers make them extremely dangerous to any conventional force. Captain Lisa Turner had been quietly reviewing fleet readiness reports. Madam President, our ships are faster and more maneuverable than Vorthon vessels. Our targeting systems are more accurate and our missile technology is superior, but they have us outnumbered almost 3-to-1 in their primary fleet alone. Sullivan walked to the center of the room. That's why I'm requesting authorization for Operation Lighthouse. Full mobilization of the 1st, 3rd, and 5th fleets. 637 ships including support vessels. 43,000 personnel. The room fell completely silent. General Hayes was the first to speak. Kate, you're talking about the largest military operation in human history. We'd be committing nearly 60% of our total fleet strength to a conflict that isn't directly threatening human territory. Yet, Sullivan replied firmly, the Vorthons aren't going to stop with the Catherians. Look at their expansion pattern. They're moving steadily toward the core systems. Eventually they'll reach human space. We can fight them now while they're extended and focused on multiple targets. Or we can wait for them to consolidate their conquests and turn their full attention to us. President Chen examined the strategic projections. Admiral, what are our chances of success with such a force? Sullivan activated a tactical simulation. Our ships are technologically superior in every category except raw firepower. Human vessels were designed with lessons learned from centuries of warfare against other humans. We've been fighting each other since before we reached the stars. The Vorthons conquered primitive species with overwhelming numbers. They've never faced an opponent with our level of tactical sophistication. Admiral Grant pulled up logistics reports. The mobilization would take 72 hours minimum. We'd need to coordinate movements across 12 star systems, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, medical supplies for our own forces. It's possible, but it would stretch our supply lines. Captain Turner stood and moved to the tactical display. The Catherians have perhaps 3 weeks before the Vorthon final assault begins. If we move immediately, we can reach their space in time to intercept the enemy fleet. General Hayes shook his head. This is madness. The Catherians asked for medicine and food. You're proposing to send them the largest battle fleet in human history. President Chen raised her hand for silence. General Hayes raises a valid point. However, we need to consider the broader implications. Dr. Pierce, what was the actual impact of Catherian agricultural assistance on our colony worlds? Dr. Sam Pierce, the agricultural advisor, accessed his records. Madam President, the crop failures on our 3 outer colonies were catastrophic. Without Catherian intervention, we estimate that 2.3 million civilians would have died from starvation. The Catherians shared their technology freely, asked for no payment, and provided ongoing technical support. They literally saved entire worlds. The weight of that debt hung heavy in the room. Human culture had strong traditions about honoring obligations. When someone saved your family, they became part of your family, and family protected each other no matter the cost. President Chen looked around the table. The Catherians turn to us because they have nowhere else to go. Every other major power in this sector is either too weak to help or too distant to arrive in time. They're facing complete extinction at the hands of a ruthless enemy. Admiral Sullivan brought up intelligence files on Vorthon occupation policies. The Vorthons don't just conquer territory. They strip planets bare of all resources and enslave or kill the entire population. If we don't act, the Catherian Confederation will cease to exist. 3 billion innocent beings will die. General Hayes studied the fleet deployment schedules. Even if we authorize this operation, can we realistically coordinate such a massive force? We've never attempted anything on this scale. Captain Turner pulled up training records. Our fleet commanders have been drilling joint operations for years. The First Fleet has experience from the Centauri campaign. The Third Fleet handled the Vega Sector pirates. The Fifth Fleet just completed war games in the Outer Rim. They know how to work together. Admiral Grant highlighted supply chain logistics. We can establish forward supply bases using our construction ships. The asteroid fields in the Cytherian outer system would provide raw materials for ammunition and repairs. It's ambitious but achievable. President Chen stood and walked to the main display. She studied the tactical situation for several minutes while the room waited in silence. The decision she made in the next few moments would determine the fate of 3 billion Cytherian lives and potentially reshape the balance of power in this entire sector of the galaxy. The Cytherians saved millions of human lives without asking for anything in return, she said finally. When they reached out to us for help, they specifically mentioned that we had become friends. Friends don't abandon each other in times of crisis. She turned to face Admiral Sullivan. Admiral, you have authorization for Operation Lighthouse. Full mobilization of the First, Third, and Fifth Fleets. Show the galaxy what human friendship looks like. The orders went out immediately across human space. Fleet commanders received priority transmissions with deployment coordinates and timetables. Captain Ben Parker of the heavy cruiser Liberty was conducting routine patrols near the Tau Ceti system when his communications officer reported an incoming priority message. Captain, we're being recalled to Luna Station immediately. Maximum speed authorized. Parker read the brief message with growing excitement. After months of patrol duty, the Liberty was finally going to see real action. He ordered his crew to prepare for hyperspace jump and set course for the rally point. Similar scenes played out across human territory. Captain Danny White of the destroyer Falcon received orders while his ship was docked for maintenance. Chief Engineer Amy Rogers had been planning to visit her family on Mars, but those plans would have to wait. The fleet needed every available ship. On Luna Station, Admiral Sullivan stood in the main operations center watching the tactical display as green markers began moving toward the rally point. Ships that had been scattered across dozens of star systems were converging on coordinates deep in space between human and Cytherian territory. The mobilization was unprecedented in both scale and speed. Logistics officers worked around the clock to coordinate supply runs. Medical teams prepared for potential casualties. Marine units loaded assault equipment and prepared for possible boarding actions. Back on Cytheria Prime, Ambassador Zekthai waited anxiously for any response to his desperate plea for aid. Long-range sensors showed the Vorthan fleet continuing its advance toward their space. Civilian transports continued arriving with refugees from the outer colonies, their stories growing more desperate with each arrival. Velnara stood in the command center watching the tactical display. Any word from our allies? Zekthai checked his communications console. The humans acknowledged our message. They said aid is coming and that we should maintain our position. They advised us not to surrender. How long until their medical ships arrive? Unknown. Given the distance involved, perhaps 10 days minimum for a fast courier vessel. Neither of them imagined that over 600 human warships were already moving toward their space at maximum speed, carrying 43,000 personnel ready for the largest. War Leader Scarth stood on the command bridge of his flagship Death Shadow, watching the tactical display with cold satisfaction. His massive Vorthon fleet had reached the outer edge of the Cytherian system right on schedule. 320 vessels stretched across space in perfect formation, their dark hulls bristling with plasma cannons and torpedo launchers. The reptilian commander's yellow eyes studied the pathetic defense force that awaited them. 40 small ships, most of them converted civilian vessels with light armament. It would hardly qualify as target practice. Still, protocol demanded that he offer the traditional surrender terms before beginning the extermination. Scarth activated his communications array and broadcast on all frequencies. His voice carried the authority of conquest that had crushed 12 star systems. Cytherian Confederation, this is War Leader Scarth of the Vorthan Empire. You are completely surrounded and outnumbered. Surrender immediately and your deaths will be swift. Resist and we will make your suffering last for days. On Cytheria Prime, Velnara received the transmission in the Planetary Defense Center. Around her, technicians worked frantically at their stations while massive displays showed the approaching enemy fleet. The mathematical certainty of their destruction was undeniable. But something had changed in the past few hours. War Leader Scarth, she replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The Catherian Confederation rejects your demands. We have allies coming to our aid. We will not surrender. Scarth's laughter echoed across his bridge, causing his officers to hiss with amusement. Allies? Our intelligence reports indicate you contacted the humans, a species that barely crawled out of their home system 2 centuries ago. Let them come with their primitive ships. It will make the conquest more entertaining. The war leader gestured to his tactical officer. Begin the advance. All ships maintain formation. We will crush their defense fleet first, then begin bombardment of the planet. I want this finished within 6 hours. Meanwhile, at Rally Point Sigma in deep space, Admiral Sullivan stood on the bridge of her flagship Constitution. Around her stretched the largest battle formation in human history. 637 vessels arranged in 3 distinct waves, each group designed for a specific tactical role. Captain Jake Morrison aboard the exploration vessel Horizon served as their guide. His ship had mapped the hyperspace routes to Catherian space and would lead the fleet through the complex series of jumps required to reach their destination. Morrison had volunteered for the dangerous mission, knowing that his small vessel would be among the first to face enemy fire. Sullivan activated the fleet-wide communication system. All ships, this is Admiral Sullivan. In approximately 30 minutes, we will begin the first wave jump into the Catherian system. Our intelligence indicates the Vorthan fleet has already begun their attack. We will be jumping into an active combat zone. She paused, looking out at the vast formation of ships surrounding her flagship. The Catherians asked for aid. They shared their agricultural technology freely when our colonies faced starvation. 2 million human lives were saved because of their generosity. Today we repay that debt. The Admiral's voice carried across hundreds of ships, reaching 43,000 human personnel. Remember, we represent more than just Earth today. We represent the idea that civilized species stand together against tyranny. We represent the promise that when someone helps your family, they become family. Captain Lisa Turner aboard the Washington prepared her crew for combat. As commander of the advance squadron, her 53 ships would be first through the hyperspace jump. They would face the entire Vorthan fleet alone for several crucial minutes until the second wave could arrive. All stations report ready, her tactical officer announced. Turner nodded. Weapons charged, shields at maximum, point defense systems online. Remember, we're not trying to win the battle in the first wave. We're trying to survive long enough for the cavalry to arrive. Back in the Catherian system, Scarth's fleet had closed to within firing range of the small defense force. The Catherian ships fought with desperate courage, but their light weapons barely scratched the armor of the advancing dreadnoughts. One by one, the defending vessels exploded under concentrated plasma fire. Velnara watched helplessly as her people died defending their homeworld. Any word from the humans? Ambassador Zekthai checked his communications console for the 100th time in the past hour. Nothing new. Their last message said aid was coming and to maintain position. How can we maintain position when our fleet is being destroyed? Before Zekthai could answer, the sensor operator called out excitedly. Ma'am, hyperspace signatures detected at the system's edge. Multiple contacts emerging from jump space. Velnara rushed to the sensor station. The human aid convoy? The operator stared at his display in confusion. These readings are unusual. The hyperspace distortions are much larger than expected for medical ships. I'm reading 53 contacts. All of them appear to be military vessels. On his flagship, War Leader Scarth received similar reports from his sensor operators. He studied the tactical display with growing interest. 50 human ships? This is unexpected. I assumed they would send perhaps 3 or 4 vessels at most. His tactical officer highlighted the new contacts on the main display. War Leader, these vessels are maintaining combat formation. They appear to be preparing for battle. Scarth's eyes gleamed with anticipation. Even better. We will crush the human fleet and the Catherian defense force simultaneously. It will send a clear message to any other species considering resistance. Captain Turner's Washington led the first wave of human ships as they materialized at the edge of the Catherian system. Her sensors immediately detected the massive Vorthan fleet and the remnants of the Catherian defense force. The tactical situation was exactly as bad as intelligence had predicted. All ships, combat formation Delta, target the nearest Vorthan cruisers and prepare for evasive maneuvers. We need to draw their attention away from the Cytherians until the second wave arrives. The 53 ships of the first wave accelerated toward the Vorthon formation. Their sleek hulls and advanced propulsion systems allowed them to close the distance far faster than Scarth had expected. Within minutes, the first human missiles began striking Vorthon vessels. On Cytheria Prime, the population watched in amazement as human ships engaged the enemy fleet. News broadcasts carried the images across the planet as hope began to replace despair in the hearts of billions. They came, Belnara whispered. The humans actually came to help us. But even as she spoke, sensors detected the second wave of hyperspace signatures. This time, the readings were even more massive. 200 additional ships materialized in space, their weapons already charging for combat. Zekthai stared at the display in disbelief. 250 human ships? This isn't a medical convoy. This is a battle fleet. War Leader Scarth received the reports with growing unease. 250 human vessels was far more than intelligence had suggested possible. His own fleet still held numerical superiority, but the margin was much smaller than he had anticipated. All ships, engage the human fleet. Destroy them quickly before they can coordinate their attack. But even as he gave the order, his sensors detected a third wave of hyperspace distortions. This time the readings were so massive that his tactical officer had to recalibrate the display twice to confirm the numbers, Admiral. Sullivan's constitution led nearly 400 additional vessels into the Cytherian system. Dreadnoughts, battleships, heavy cruisers, destroyers, carriers, and massive support ships stretched across space in an awesome display of military power. The third wave alone outnumbered the entire Vorthon fleet. On Cytheria Prime, the sensor stations went silent as operators struggled to count the new arrivals. The display showed over 600 human ships now present in their system. The supposed aid convoy had become the largest military force anyone had ever seen. Velnara could barely speak. How many ships did they send? The sensor operator's voice was barely a whisper. All of them. I think they sent all of them. Admiral Sullivan's voice broadcast on all frequencies, her words translated into perfect Cytherian. This is Admiral Kate Sullivan of the United Earth Federation Fleet. We received your call for aid. The cavalry's here. War Leader Scarth stared at his tactical display in stunned silence. 637 human warships now faced his fleet. The numerical advantage he had counted on was gone. For the first time in his military career, the Vorthon commander found himself outgunned. His communications officer's voice was tight with barely controlled fear. War Leader, the humans are hailing us directly. Sullivan's transmission cut through the static of battle. War Leader Scarth, this is Admiral Sullivan. The Cytherians are under the protection of the United Earth Federation. You have 30 seconds to begin withdrawing from this system, or we will remove you. Scarth's clawed hands gripped the armrests of his command chair. No species had ever dared issue ultimatums to the Vorthon Empire. The arrogance of these humans was beyond comprehension. Did they not understand who they were threatening? Human Admiral, he replied, his voice dripping with contempt. The Vorthon Empire does not take orders from primitive species who barely understand. War Leader Scarth's pride burned like molten metal in his chest as he stared at the massive human formation. No species in the galaxy had ever dared to threaten the Vorthon Empire. These upstart humans would learn the price of such arrogance. He turned to his weapons officer with cold determination. All ships, attack formation prime. Target their flagship and heavy vessels first. Show these primitives what happens when they challenge the Empire. The Vorthon fleet opened fire with devastating plasma salvos that lit up space like miniature suns. Massive energy beams streaked across the void toward the human formation. The war leader expected to see human ships exploding under the withering barrage within seconds. Instead, the human fleet performed maneuvers that defied everything Scarth knew about space combat. The massive ships moved with impossible grace, rolling and weaving through the plasma fire like dancers avoiding raindrops. Their point defense systems created walls of intercepting fire that destroyed incoming torpedoes before they could reach their targets. Admiral. Sullivan watched the Vorthon attack from the bridge of the Constitution. Her tactical officers called out damage reports as the first enemy salvo reached the human fleet. 3 destroyers took glancing hits but maintained formation. The heavy cruiser Boston reported minor hull damage, but all systems remained operational. Return fire, Sullivan ordered calmly. All ships weapons free. Show them why humans don't make idle threats. The human response was like nothing the Vorthon Empire had ever encountered. Where Vorthon ships relied on brute force plasma cannons, human vessels employed sophisticated missile systems, particle beam weapons, and electromagnetic railguns. Captain Turner's Washington launched a full spread of smart missiles that curved around friendly ships and struck 3 Vorthon cruisers simultaneously. Captain Ben Parker's heavy cruiser, Liberty, demonstrated the precision that human weapon systems had achieved. His ship's main railgun fired a tungsten projectile at 30% light speed directly through the shields and armor of a Vorthon dreadnought. The kinetic impact created an explosion that could be seen across the entire system. The technological gap became apparent within the first 10 minutes of battle. Human ships moved faster, turned quicker, and struck with deadly accuracy. Their weapon systems locked onto targets with computer precision, while Vorthon gunners struggled to track the dancing human. Vessel's war leader Scarth watched in growing horror as his fleet began taking massive casualties. The human ships fought with a coordination that seemed impossible. They moved as a single organism, each vessel supporting the others in complex tactical patterns that maximized their firepower while minimizing their exposure to enemy weapons. "How are they doing this?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "Our ships are larger and more heavily armed." The officer studied his displays with confusion. "War leader, their technology appears far more advanced than our intelligence indicated. Their targeting systems are achieving hit rates of over 90%, while our weapons are barely reaching 30% accuracy." Captain Danny, White's destroyer Falcon, demonstrated the human advantage in small unit tactics. His ship darted between 2 Vorthon battleships, launching missiles at point-blank range before disappearing into the debris field of a destroyed enemy vessel. The battleships, designed for long-range bombardment, could not bring their weapons to bear on such a small and agile target. On Kytheria Prime, Velnar and her staff watched the battle with growing amazement. The human fleet was not just holding its own against the mighty Vorthon armada. They were winning, decisively. Their ships moved like living creatures, the sensor operator reported with awe. "I've never seen anything like their coordination patterns." Ambassador Zekthai pulled up tactical analyses on his personal display. "Look at their formation structure. Each group of ships supports the others. When one vessel takes damage, 2 others move to cover it while a third provides fire support. They fight as if they share a single mind." The battle raged for 2 hours as the human fleet systematically dismantled Vorthon resistance. Human missile cruisers launched coordinated salvos that overwhelmed enemy point defenses. Human destroyers used their superior speed to get behind Vorthon heavy ships and attack their vulnerable engine sections. Human battleships engaged the enemy dreadnoughts in direct combat and proved superior in every category. War leader Scarth's flagship Death's Shadow shuddered under repeated hits from human weapons. His bridge crew worked frantically to maintain systems as damage reports flooded in from across the ship. Half his fleet was already destroyed or disabled. The humans had lost fewer than 30 vessels. "War leader," his communications officer called out desperately, "we're receiving surrender requests from 17 of our ships. Their captains are requesting permission to withdraw." Scarth's yellow eyes blazed with fury. "Vorthon warriors do not surrender. All ships will fight to the death." But even as he spoke, his tactical display showed the brutal reality of the situation. The human fleet had carved through his forces like a blade through soft tissue. Ships that had conquered dozens of worlds now drifted as burning hulks in space. Captain Lisa Turner's Washington had become the tip of the spear for the human advance. Her ship led a formation of cruisers and destroyers in a devastating attack on the Vorthon center. Her weapons officer reported target locks on 3 enemy dreadnoughts simultaneously. "Fire all tubes," Turner ordered. "Let's finish this." The Washington's missile launchers erupted in synchronized fury. Dozens of smart warheads streaked toward their targets while the ship's particle beam weapons carved through enemy shields like paper. 2 Vorthon dreadnoughts exploded in spectacular fireballs, while the third lost power and began drifting helplessly. Admiral Sullivan opened a communication channel to the entire battlefield. Her voice carried clearly over the chaos of combat. "War leader Scarth, you asked how a species barely 2 centuries in space built such a fleet. The answer is simple. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. We got very good at it." The word struck Scarth like a physical blow. The humans had not built their fleet to fight aliens. They had built it to fight other humans. Every weapon system, every tactical doctrine, every strategic concept had been refined through millennia of warfare against opponents who shared their own intelligence and ingenuity. His tactical officer's voice was barely audible above the alarms. "War leader, we've lost over 200 ships. The humans show no signs of slowing their attack." Scarth looked at his display and saw the mathematical certainty of total defeat. His once mighty fleet was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that fought with precision he had never imagined possible. The humans moved their ships like chess masters, always 3 moves ahead, always anticipating his responses. "All remaining ships," he broadcast on the fleet frequency, "retreat to hyperspace. We cannot win this battle." But Captain Morrison's exploration vessel Horizon had been busy during the fight. His ship and others like it had deployed hyperspace interdiction fields around the system. The technology was experimental but effective. Any ship trying to enter hyperspace within the affected area would find their jump engines disabled. Scarth's retreat order met with desperate responses from across his fleet. "War leader, we cannot jump. Something is interfering with our hyperspace drives. Engineering reports the jump. Engines are operational but cannot achieve transition. We're trapped in the system." The war leader stared at his tactical display as the remaining human ships closed in for the final assault. Less than 30 Vorthon vessels remained operational out of the 320 that had entered the system. His flagship was dying around him. Life support failing, weapons offline, engines barely functional. Admiral Sullivan's voice cut through the static of his damaged communications system. "War leader Scarth, this is your final warning. Order your remaining ships to surrender immediately, or we will destroy every last one of them." Scarth looked around his ruined bridge at his surviving crew members. They had served the Empire faithfully for decades, conquering world after world in the name of Vorthon supremacy. They did not deserve to die for his pride. "Human Admiral," he transmitted, his voice heavy with defeat, "the Vorthon fleet surrenders. We yield the field to your superior forces." Sullivan's response was immediate. "All Vorthon vessels will power down weapons and engines immediately. Any ship that attempts to flee or fight will be destroyed without further warning." Across the battlefield, the surviving Vorthon ships went dark as their crews followed the surrender order. The Battle of Kytheria Prime was over. The mighty Vorthon Empire had suffered its first major defeat in over a century, at the hands of a species they had dismissed as primitive. On Kytheria Prime, the population watched in stunned silence as news of the victory spread across their world. The humans had not just saved them from extinction, they had utterly crushed the most feared military force in this sector of the galaxy. Velnara turned to Ambassador Zekthai with tears in her eyes. "We asked them for medical supplies and food. They brought us the largest fleet in human history." Zekthai nodded slowly, still struggling to comprehend what he had witnessed. "I don't think they understood the assignment." Admiral Sullivan's voice broadcast across all frequencies in perfect Kytherian translation. The silence that followed the battle was broken only by the hum of rescue operations beginning across the Kytherian system. Human medical ships moved between the debris fields, searching for survivors from both fleets. Admiral Sullivan had given strict orders that wounded Vorthon personnel were to receive the same medical care as human casualties. The war was over, and now came the work of peace. War leader Scarth sat in the detention bay of the human battleship Constitution, his yellow eyes staring at the deck plating. His once proud uniform was torn and stained with the green blood of his species. Around him sat the surviving commanders of his fleet, all of them struggling to comprehend the magnitude of their defeat. The door opened, and Admiral Sullivan entered with 2 Marine guards. She studied the reptilian commander who had terrorized dozens of worlds and enslaved millions of beings. In person, he seemed smaller and less threatening than his reputation suggested. "War leader Scarth," Sullivan said, taking a seat across from him. "I'm Admiral Kate Sullivan, commander of the United Earth Federation forces." Scarth raised his head slowly. "I know who you are. You are the one who destroyed my fleet." "Your fleet destroyed itself when it chose to attack peaceful civilizations," Sullivan replied. "The Kytherians never threatened your empire. They were farmers and scientists who wanted only to live in peace." Scarth's bitter laugh filled the small detention room. "Peace is a luxury that only the strong can afford. The weak exist only to serve the strong. That is the way of the universe. Sullivan leaned back in her chair. Is that what you told the families on the 12 worlds you conquered? Did you explain to them that they were weak as you killed their children? The war leader's eyes flashed with anger. Do not lecture me about warfare, human. Your species conquered this system with overwhelming force. You are no different than the Empire. The difference, Sullivan said quietly, is that we came here to protect the innocent. You came here to slaughter them. When this is over, we'll go home and leave the Catherians to govern themselves. You would have turned their worlds into slave camps. Meanwhile, on the surface of Catheria Prime, massive celebrations filled the streets of every city. Beings who had resigned themselves to death now danced in the streets and embraced strangers with joy. The human fleet had not just saved their civilization, but had proven that the mighty Vorthan Empire could be defeated. Velnara stood in her office looking out at the crowds below. The same window where she had watched refugee ships arrive now showed her people celebrating their miraculous salvation. Her aide approached with a communication pad. Ma'am, Admiral Sullivan is requesting a meeting aboard her flagship. She wants to discuss the political situation following the battle. Velnara nodded. Prepare the diplomatic shuttle. I want Ambassador Zekthai with me. It's time we properly thanked our human friends. The journey to the Constitution took only 20 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime to Velnara. She had spent weeks preparing for the death of her civilization. Now she needed to prepare for its rebirth. The shuttle bay of the human flagship was enormous, large enough to hold dozens of Catherian vessels. Admiral Sullivan met them personally at the airlock. She was smaller than Velnara had expected, but her presence commanded immediate respect. The human admiral wore a simple blue uniform with minimal decorations, very different from the elaborate regalia favored by most galactic leaders. Civilian leader Velnara, Sullivan said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Welcome aboard the Constitution. Velnara took the offered hand, marveling at how such a small being had commanded the largest military force she had ever seen. Admiral Sullivan, on behalf of 3 billion Catherian citizens, I thank you for saving our people. They walked through the corridors of the massive ship toward the Admiral's quarters. Velnara noticed how the human crew moved with purpose and efficiency. There was none of the fear or subservience she had observed on Vorthan vessels during diplomatic encounters. Sullivan's office was surprisingly modest for someone who commanded such power. The walls held simple displays showing human colonies and fleet formations. A single desk dominated the center of the room with 2 comfortable chairs arranged for conversation. Please sit, Sullivan said, activating a translation device on her desk. We have much to discuss about the future of this region. Ambassador Zekthai leaned forward eagerly. Admiral, your fleet's intervention has changed everything. The Vorthan Empire has controlled this sector for over a century. With their primary fleet destroyed, dozens of enslaved worlds will try to break free. Sullivan nodded. Our intelligence services are already tracking liberation movements across former Vorthan territory. The Empire will try to consolidate their remaining forces, but they've lost their ability to project power on a galactic scale. Velnara studied the tactical displays on the Admiral's wall. What happens now? Will your fleet remain to help stabilize the region? That depends on what you want, Sullivan replied. The United Earth Federation doesn't build empires. We don't conquer territory or impose our government on other species, but we also don't abandon our friends when they need help. The Admiral activated a holographic display showing the current political situation. Red areas indicated continuing Vorthan control, while yellow zones showed worlds in rebellion. Blue markers represented neutral territories and potential allies. The Catherian Confederation could become the foundation for a new alliance of free worlds, Sullivan continued. Your people have the agricultural technology that many worlds need. Your peaceful traditions could provide an alternative to Vorthan brutality. Zekthai's eyes widened as he grasped the implications. You're suggesting we help lead the reconstruction of this entire sector? I'm suggesting you have an opportunity to build something better than what came before, Sullivan said. The human fleet will provide security while you establish diplomatic relationships with other liberated worlds. We'll share defensive technology to help you protect yourselves. Velnara felt overwhelmed by the scope of what Sullivan was proposing. Admiral, we're farmers and scientists. We've never been a military power. How can we lead other species? Sullivan smiled. Leadership isn't about having the biggest guns. It's about having the wisdom to use power responsibly. The Catherians freely shared their agricultural knowledge with human colonies when we were struggling. That kind of generosity builds stronger alliances than any weapon. Over the next several hours, they discussed the practical details of regional reconstruction. Human construction ships would help repair damaged infrastructure on liberated worlds. Medical teams would treat populations that had suffered under Vorthon occupation. Most importantly, human diplomatic corps would help negotiate treaties between species that had been enemies for generations. The meeting was interrupted by a communication from Earth. President Chen appeared on the holographic display, her image slightly delayed by the quantum transmission across interstellar distances. Admiral Sullivan, the entire Federation Council has been following the battle reports. I want to personally congratulate you and your crews on this remarkable victory. Sullivan stood at attention. Thank you, Madam President. The fleet performed exceptionally under challenging circumstances. President Chen turned to address Velnara directly. Civilian leader Velnara, on behalf of the people of Earth and all human colonies, I want to formally invite the Catherian Confederation to join the United Earth Federation as equal partners. The offer struck Velnara speechless. She had expected gratitude and perhaps a mutual defense agreement. She had not expected an invitation to join the most powerful alliance in human space. Your agricultural knowledge saved millions of human lives, President Chen continued. Your peaceful traditions align with our own values. Together we can build a future where species like the Vorthon Empire cannot terrorize innocent civilizations. Ambassador Zekthai found his voice first. Madam President, this is an enormous honor, but we must consult with our people before making such a momentous decision. Of course, President Chen replied. Take all the time you need. The invitation will remain open indefinitely. After the transmission ended, Velnara sat in stunned silence. In the space of a single day, her people had gone from facing extinction to being offered partnership with the most advanced military force in the galaxy. Admiral, she said finally, when we sent our plea for aid, we asked for medical supplies and food. You brought us 600 warships instead. Sullivan's expression grew thoughtful. Velnara, where I come from, when someone helps your family, they become family. And nobody threatens family. The words carried a weight that transcended translation. The Catherians had helped humanity during a time of crisis, asking nothing in return except friendship. When they faced annihilation, humanity had responded with everything they had. We misunderstood your assignment completely, Velnara said with tears in her eyes. We are forever grateful that you did. 6 months later, the Catherian Confederation formally joined the United Earth Federation in a ceremony broadcast across both species' territories. The signing took place aboard the Constitution, while it patrolled the border between free space and the remnants of the Vorthon Empire. War leader Scarth, now a prisoner awaiting trial for war crimes, watched the ceremony from his